The morning sun cast a golden glow over the city of Lagos, bouncing off the glass windows of tall buildings and making the busy streets shimmer. Honking cars clogged the roads, their drivers impatient as pedestrians weaved between them. The air buzzed with the usual sounds of the city, laughter, chatter, and the rhythmic calls of street vendors. In the middle of all this stood the grandest school in the area, an elite academy for girls. The school's tall gates opened to reveal a vast compound, clean and well-kept, with a playground large enough to fit an entire football team. The buildings were bright and modern, with large windows that let in the warm sunlight. The students, dressed in their neat uniforms, walked in organized lines, chatting softly as they moved to their classes. Among the students there's a girl who is always coming out top of her class, and she puts in the hard work by making sure to study hard. She's attentive in class, and when questions are asked she makes sure to put her hands up to give correct answers, and for this reason she was known and loved by her school headmistress and parents. When the school term ends she usually comes first among the other girls. She's pretty but decent in dressing. The name of this girl was Linda. She was known as the smartest student in Elite Academy for girls. Every term, without fail, she took the first position in her class. It wasn't just luck, Linda worked for it. While other students spent their free time gossiping or scrolling through their phones, Linda was always reading, solving equations, or writing essays. But despite being the top student, she wasn't arrogant. She was polite, always ready to help anyone struggling with their studies. She dressed neatly, her uniform always crisp and properly ironed. Though she was naturally pretty, she never bragged about it. Her focus was on her studies, and nothing else. Many admired her. Some were jealous. But Linda didn't let it get to her. Linda sat at the front of the class, her back straight, her eyes focused on the math problems on the board. Numbers had always made sense to her. They were logical, predictable, unlike people. The math teacher, Mr. Damale, stood at the front, explaining an equation. He was young, in his late 20s, and one of the most admired teachers in the school. But as he spoke, his gaze kept drifting, not to the board, not to the other students, but to Linda. At first, Linda didn't notice. She was too busy writing down notes, making sure to understand every step. But after a while, the feeling of being watched became impossible to ignore. She looked up, and their eyes met. Mr. Damale quickly turned away, clearing his throat. He continued his lesson, but his voice was slightly unsteady. The other students didn't seem to notice, but Mira, sitting a few rows behind, did. Myra's fingers tightened around her pen. Something about the way Mr. Damale looked at Linda made her uneasy. It wasn't just admiration, it was something else. The lunch hall buzzed with chatter and laughter as students lined up for food or sat in groups, discussing everything from school gossip to social media trends. Linda sat alone at her usual table, carefully unwrapping her homemade sandwich. Mira walked over and slid into the seat beside her, placing her juice box on the table. "Hey," she said casually. Linda glanced up and gave a small smile. "Hey?" For a moment, they ate in silence. Then Mira leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "So, did you notice how Mr. Damale was looking at you today?" Linda stiffened. "I'd rather not talk about that." Mira smirked. "Come on, Linda. Don't act like you don't see it. That man is obsessed with you." Linda sighed, taking a sip of water. "He's just being inappropriate. I'll handle it." Mira studied her for a moment, then smiled slyly. "Or, you could use it to your advantage." Linda frowned. "What do you mean?" Mira leaned closer, her voice dropping even lower. "Think about it. You're already the smartest girl in school, but imagine how much easier things could be if you had the teachers wrapped around your finger. Especially Mr. Damale. He adores you. If you played along a little, he'd give you better grades without you even having to try. Linda's stomach twisted. Mira, that's wrong. Mira shrugged. Is it? People use what they have to get ahead all the time. You're beautiful, Linda. If you dressed a little differently, showed a little more skin, let him think you're interested, he'd do anything for you. Linda shook her head, pushing her tray away. I work hard for my grades. I don't need to trick anyone. Mira sighed dramatically. You're so old-fashioned. Life isn't just about working hard. Sometimes, you have to be smart about things. Use what you have. Linda felt a chill run down her spine. The way Mira spoke, it was like she was trying to plant a dangerous seed in her mind. She stood up, grabbing her tray. I don't need shortcuts, Mira. I'd rather succeed the right way. Mira rolled her eyes. Suit yourself. But don't be surprised when someone else takes advantage of an opportunity you ignored. As Linda walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right with Mira. And she had no idea just how dangerous that conversation would turn out to be. Linda sat on her bed that evening, her mind replaying Mira's words over and over. You could use it to your advantage. She had dismissed the idea at first, but no matter how hard she tried to push it away, it lingered. The way the male teachers looked at her, the way their gazes lingered just a second too long, it all made sense now. They admired her. And admiration could be turned into power. For weeks, she struggled with the thought. But as time passed, something inside her shifted. She noticed how some girls who barely studied still managed to get high grades because they had connections. She saw how the male teachers seemed softer, more lenient, toward the students they found attractive. And then, one morning, she made a decision. She stood in front of her mirror, staring at herself. She had always dressed modestly, buttoned-up shirts, skirts that reached her knees. But now, she picked out a tighter blouse, one that hugged her figure just enough. She adjusted her skirt, making it slightly shorter than usual. When she walked into school that day, heads turned. The whispers started almost immediately. Some students murmured in admiration, others in jealousy. The male teachers' gazes lingered longer than before. Even Mr. Damele's usual glances turned into something more intense. At first, Linda felt a strange sense of power. She was no longer just the smartest girl in class, she was the most noticed. She started spending less time in the library and more time perfecting her look. She made sure her hair was always flawless, her perfume just strong enough to leave an impression when she walked past. And it worked. Her grades remained at the top, but not because she was studying. Teachers overlooked her mistakes, giving her free marks even when she performed poorly in tests. She didn't have to try anymore. The old Linda, the one who worked hard for every grade, was slipping away. And she wasn't sure she wanted her back. At first, everything seemed perfect. Linda enjoyed the attention, the effortless grades, and the feeling of power she had over the teachers. But it didn't take long for the whispers to turn into something else. It started with side glances in the hallway. Then, students who used to admire her began whispering behind her back. The jealousy in their eyes was unmistakable. She thinks she's better than us. She doesn't even study anymore, but look at her grades. I heard she's having an affair with Mr. Damele. The rumor spread like wildfire. Every corner of the school echoed with murmurs about Linda and the male teachers. At first, she ignored them. She told herself they were just jealous, that they didn't understand. But then, her so-called friends began pulling away. Even Mira, the one who had given her the idea in the first place, kept her distance. Linda felt alone. Walking through the school became a nightmare. When she passed by, students would either turn away in disgust or glare at her in silent judgment. Some even laughed, whispering as she walked past. She tried to act like it didn't bother her, but deep inside, it was eating her up. Then, one morning, everything came crashing down. A teacher entered her classroom and called her name. "Linda, the headmistress wants to see you." The room fell silent. She felt her hands turn cold as she slowly stood up and walked out. The hallway felt longer than usual, and with each step, her heart pounded harder. When she entered the headmistress's office, she saw the older woman seated at her desk, her sharp eyes scanning Linda from head to toe. "Sit down," the headmistress said firmly. Linda obeyed, her hands trembling in her lap. "Do you know why you're here?" Linda swallowed hard. She couldn't find her voice, so she simply nodded. "There have been disturbing rumors about you, Linda," the headmistress continued. "Students and even some teachers have expressed concerns." She folded her hands. "Tell me the truth. Have you been engaging in any inappropriate relationships with the teachers?" Linda's chest tightened. She wanted to deny it immediately, to defend herself. But when she opened her mouth, nothing came out. Tears burned her eyes. She had never done anything physical with the teachers. But she had used her looks, her charm, to get special treatment. And deep down, she knew it was wrong. Finally, her voice broke through the silence. I never did any of those things," she whispered. "I swear, I never had an affair with any teacher." She wiped her eyes. "But I did use my beauty to get good grades. I stopped studying and relied on their attention." The headmistress's eyes narrowed. "So you admit to manipulating your teachers?" Linda nodded slowly. The silence in the room was unbearable. Then, the headmistress sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Linda, you were one of our brightest students. You had everything: intelligence, discipline, a future ahead of you." She shook her head. "And yet, you threw it away for what?" "Attention." Linda lowered her head in shame. The headmistress's voice hardened. "This school does not tolerate such behavior. You will face consequences for your actions." Linda felt her world crumbling around her. She had thought she was in control. But now, everything is falling apart. Linda sat in the back seat of the car, staring out the window as her father drove in silence. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on her like a heavy stone. She had been expelled. The moment the headmistress made the announcement, gasps had filled the office. Her parents, who had been called in earlier, sat frozen in shock. Her father's jaw had tightened, his knuckles white as he clenched his fists. Her mother had covered her face with trembling hands, shaking her head in disbelief. The ride home was silent, but the air in the car was thick with disappointment. When they reached home, the moment Linda stepped into the house, her father's voice exploded like thunder. "How could you do this?" He slammed his hand against the table. "After everything we have done for you. All the school fees, all the late nights making sure you had everything you needed, this is how you repay us." Linda flinched. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she kept her head down. Her mother sat on the couch, shaking her head. "I can't even show my face outside. Do you know how many people have called me already? My own daughter, expelled in disgrace." "I didn't," Linda's voice cracked. "I didn't sleep with anyone. I swear." Her father let out a bitter laugh. "And that makes it better. You used your beauty to get good grades. Do you even hear yourself? You were the smartest girl in that school. You had a future, Linda. Now what?" Linda wiped her tears. "It was Mira," she whispered. "She started the rumors. She was jealous." Her mother scoffed. "And so what? She put a gun to your head and forced you to behave like this?" Linda swallowed hard. She had no excuse. She had made the choice, and now she was paying for it. Her father shook his head. "You've ruined everything." He stormed out of the living room, leaving only her mother, who looked at her with tired, disappointed eyes. "I don't even know who you are anymore, Linda." Then she, too, walked away, leaving Linda standing alone, drowning in regret. Everything was gone: her school, her reputation, the admiration she once had. And worst of all, she had no one to blame but herself. A week later, Linda found herself standing in front of a faded school building, her new uniform feeling strange and unfamiliar. The once prestigious student of elite academy for girls was now enrolled in a local school, far from the polished walls and air-conditioned classrooms she was used to. Her father had barely spoken to her since the expulsion. He had made the decision quickly, telling her that if she wanted to rebuild her life, she would do it here, where there were no shortcuts, only hard work. At first, Linda hated it. The desks were old, the classrooms smaller, and the students rougher. Some of them whispered when they saw her, recognizing her name from the scandal that had spread beyond her former school. But she had made a promise to herself. She would fix what she had broken. So, she ignored the stares. She ignored the gossip. She picked up her books and started studying again. At first, it was hard. She had fallen behind after months of relying on favoritism, and the work felt heavier than before. But she pushed through, staying up late to catch up on lessons, asking teachers for extra help when needed. Slowly, things began to change. Her grades improved, not because of her looks, but because she truly earned them. Teachers noticed her dedication, praising her for her hard work rather than her appearance. Her classmates, at first distant, started warming up to her. They saw how serious she was, how she no longer carried herself with arrogance but with determination. And for the first time in a long while, Linda felt proud, not of how she looked, but of what she was capable of. She was no longer the girl who took shortcuts. She was Linda, the hardworking student. And this time, she would not let anything take that away from her. That brings us to the end of this powerful and thought-provoking story. What do you think about Linda's journey? Do you believe she made the right choice in the end? I would love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel for more engaging African folktale stories. Also, let me know where you're watching from. I'd love to connect with you all. Until next time, stay inspired and keep learning.